Hello, everyone. That's a nice crowd. So I'm Florian Sauter, and today I want to talk a little bit about the last 12 years of my career. I'm the CTO and co-founder of eGym. And yeah, I brought to you some of the learnings, some of the insights, some of the failures of the last 12 years. So I hope there's something in it for everyone here. So let's get started. First, what or who is eGym? Maybe some of you have heard about eGym before. eGym is a tech company in the fitness space, and 12 years ago we started with this idea of building a great fitness machine, and this is actually what we're still doing. You can see the picture on the left here. It's basically a series of strength training machines for professional use, so gyms usually are our customers. And within the last 12 years, we got kind of creative and added a few elements to it. So besides the fitness machines, today we have a huge ecosystem of apps, a cloud platform where we basically collect fitness data, interact with partners on the training floor, and basically help our customers, the gyms, to be more successful, more digital, and make their products more attractive. And then the latest addition on the right is a corporate wellness platform. So basically, companies can come to us and close memberships for their employees. Employees can visit all these partner gyms. And by doing that, we try to drive even more people to a healthy lifestyle. That's the idea. So how shall I structure 12 years? I decided to basically make 5 chapters out of it, from the early phases to pretty much where we are today. Brought a brief overview of each of these phases for you, and at the end of each phase, you will see the ultimate Florian survival tips, depending on where you are today. Maybe that's helpful, maybe not. So let's dive right into the early days. So now, traveling back in time about 12 years. So this is how eGym looked at the time. We were about 3 people. We had this one idea. And I often get the question, how did you actually get to this idea? Of course, it was a bit of an evolution, but short version of it is we as you can see, we're not the typical gym rats. But we went to gyms. We saw everything is like fully analog. People are lifting weights up and down. That's about it. So we kind of thought, OK, we can do something there. And yeah, maybe in retrospect, it was a bit of a harder choice than it could have been. But we decided really to build a piece of hardware first, which back in the days we didn't know was a particularly difficult task. So yeah, we had this idea of replacing the weight stack of this mechanical fitness machines with an electrical motor, adding a nice user interface to it, add a screen, and make this a great experience. And you can see some of the pictures here about how this looked like. It was a lot of prototyping. You can see here we took one of these old machines from eBay and just tried to attach this motor to somehow make it work. And I think this describes quite well how this very initial phase feels like. I think it's probably not even correct to call yourself a CTO in such a phase. I mean, it's just starting a new thing, and you're the guy to make it work. And as such, this is my role description here. Be your own best engineer and try to make things work. I think that's pretty much the job description. And what's the daily routine? I mean, it's a lot of coding. It's a lot of soldering, as you can see here, sticking wires together if you choose to build. And yeah, try not to kill anyone along the way. So yeah, failures and learnings from these early days. So failure number 1. We thought our idea was unique. And I hear that a lot from young founders. People try to hide their ideas because they think it's such a unique thing. They need to protect it until then they are finally ready to execute on it, and then it will be the greatest thing on the planet. I think this does not work particularly well, and for many reasons. One is that I think an idea gets much better by talking about it with as many people as possible and ingesting all that feedback. And the other thing is that you can be pretty sure, regardless of what the idea is, that at least 10 people had this idea before, and you can be relatively sure others have this idea right at the same point in time. So I think what ultimately makes the difference is the speed of execution and the way you can improve your idea as fast as possible. We have to learn that the hard way. We actually thought we were geniuses and had this great idea. And about 6 months into the project, we had to learn that there's actually another company doing pretty much the same thing. And they even had a patent filed on the thing. So that was pretty bad. It was, in retrospect, maybe not that bad because we were forced to work around the thing, had a lot of additional great ideas in the process. But yeah, just don't believe you're the only ones. Then, failure number 2. We built a product we liked. So I think we learned a ton about product development in the last 12 years. The initial start was really more based on intuition. So we thought we know what to do. We had this great idea. We were all engineers, so quite naturally, we knew how the world worked, and that had to be it. And I think we forgot along the way that the actual target group might actually look quite different. It turned out, for example, that the very initial product was very popular with elderly people in the gyms because it was so simple to use. Of course, we didn't have that group in mind, and yeah, learned quite a bit. So whenever you build something new, ask yourself, is it really for you, or who is actually the target group you're trying to help? Then, failure number 3, now it becomes a little bit more technical. We tried kleines Stück? Well, I'll try. Okay. All right, so a little bit more technical about data and data models. So as engineers, we were pretty much in love with thinking as an engineer about the world. And one thing that we really liked is to try to capture it all in a great data model. So we spent weeks and weeks in front of the whiteboard designing this great model that could capture it all the different modes of training, all the different visions we had kind of had to be extensible in all kinds of directions. And I mean, you can already guess the gist of it. We had to kind of rewrite this 10 times anyway. Not a single line of this initial thing survived. It was actually a pretty big liability because it was way too big for what we wanted to do initially. So yeah, don't plan for scale yet is what I wrote down here. Really reduce it to the immediate minimum and try to make something work, I think is a much better approach here. And yeah, last but not least, don't build everything from scratch. It feels great as an engineer, especially back in the days, coming directly from university. You kind of think you know how things work from the inside, and it just feels great to build something that works and solves a particular problem. But surprise, surprise, most of these problems have been solved one way or the other, and you can just stick together things to prove your point in the very first prototypes. And it might look a bit like a Frankenstein, but I think it's definitely worth building such a thing to prove that your product actually has a point rather than starting to build things from scratch. It just takes way too much time. So this is the ultimate survival tips. Build stuff that works and build stuff that customers want. I also added a reading item to each of the summaries here. One book that I would recommend everyone to read in the early stages is this one, Testing Business Ideas. It has a lot of tools in it, very practical, to make sure that you're actually targeting the right thing. All right. So, next up. First traction. Oh, das ist ein guter Tipp. Ich nehme das einfach in die Hand. All right. First traction. So now we are around 2 to 3 years into the story. The team has grown to 5 to 10 people, and things start to feel that they're becoming a little bit real. We have the first paying customer for what we built, and you can see we're actually present on a trade show down here. There's a funny story about the trade show. So you can see there's a logo in front here mounted on the booth. And on day 2, one of the letters of the logo actually fell to the floor. And that was about the quality level of the products that we were offering back in the days. But it still worked out. And yeah, how did the CTO role transform here? It becomes more and more not just about making things work, but keeping things work. So you have your first paying customers. They have some expectation that the product actually does work, and it does work all the time. And that requires a bit of a different thinking here. in order to how do you deal with quality, with uptime, reliability. Suddenly all these things pop up on the radar. And I would say this is also the time when you should make your mind up about the technology set that you want to use, really. So moving away from the Frankenstein to something a little more deliberate. And yeah, I could talk a lot about technology choices. I won't do that, but I would say that this is a good time to make up your mind about what you really want to use. And it connects nicely with the first hires you want to do, because I think that's a huge success factor. People you can bring on board that are talented in a certain framework, language. So pick your technologies for the job that they should do, and pick them for the people you can hire. That would be my recommendation here. And yeah, it becomes also thinking about team processes. You're just not yourself anymore. It's a couple of people working on something. Job interviews and recruiting become a huge priority. You're still coding, at least I did at that point, which was good. Yeah, I heard somebody say, I put it here because I liked it so much, start working on the organization, not just in the organization. So I think this is the first kind of shift of the role away from just being this sole warrior to building an actual organization. So what are the learnings in this phase? Learning number one, or maybe a failure even that we did, was jumping to new technologies a little bit too fast. We actually adopted Kubernetes in, I think, 2015, which was the first public version. And yeah, exactly that. You can imagine, like, the tooling was horrible. We had to rewrite things like 1,000 times because there were incompatible changes. But boy, this was great in hiring. I mean, that was a real USP. It worked really well to attract great people who thought that this was the future, but it was an expensive choice as well, in retrospect. So if I would start over, I would build something really boring. I would choose something that is really well-established technologies with many people who are proficient in doing things. Sounds a bit boring, but I think is way better for success. Failure number two, don't build everything your customers ask for. Might sound a bit counterintuitive because everyone tells you to listen to your customer, but especially with a product that has a pretty big shopping cart, like this piece of hardware, you're finally you're super thrilled when there's a customer that might have, I don't know, 2 or 3 sites. There might be a contract ad reach that might be $1 million, and then the customer starts asking for crazy things. And of course, it's super tempting to say yes, or to turn it the other way around. The salespeople will put you in a really bad spot if you don't say yes to everything they ask for. And I think that the learning really is, sometimes you have to do that, yes, but I think it's a way better approach to ask really for the underlying problems the customers want to solve. And oftentimes, they see their particular problem and have a very particular solution in mind. But the underlying problem might just be a little bit different. And if you generalize it a little bit more, you create value, not just for the single customer, but for the whole platform. And at the same time, you really start building a product that works for everyone, and not just an individual software solution for a single customer. That's number two. And yeah, number three. We were hesitant to fire people initially, so that might sound a bit American, but yeah, starting out with a new company, building a team, I think this is one of the harder lessons to learn, that it's actually necessary to also fire people that don't work out. It's a super tough thing to do, but at the same time, it's an even worse thing to not do it, because it will drag you down, it will drag the person down that's affected, will drag the team down, and in the end, it won't help anyone. Cool, so let's move to ultimate survival tips. Hire people who are smarter than you, which was easy in my case. Use boring technologies and solve underlying customer problems. And if you still have time to read books in this phase, then this is the books to read, I would say. First one from Marty Kagan called Inspired. I think this is the ultimate Bible on product development that everybody should have read. And yeah, some book about entrepreneurship. Quite entertaining, a good read for everyone. Cool. So now, assume the company is still there and growing. It's a couple more years into the journey. We have been growing from about 50 to somewhat more than 250 people in that phase, so it covers quite a lot of ground. Growth in customers and users, and also, of course, the engineering team keeps growing quite a lot. There's problems around internationalization that suddenly pop up. And I think the CTO role shift is quite massive in this phase. Basically, you have to take care of scaling everything you did before to kind of a completely new level. And this applies for recruiting, where you suddenly cannot speak to each and everyone at each stage anymore. You need to somehow trust your teams to do the same thing at the same level of quality. There is a huge challenge in architecture and the whole tech stack decisions. Before, it was super easy. You were one small team, you met for lunch every day, you discussed the latest things, and that was the alignment. Now you suddenly need to somehow make sure that everyone has the same mental picture in their mind, which is just not easy. And then software operations, obviously, becomes a bigger topic. I think the topic I spent most time on in this phase is really cutting the teams the right way. And I guess I could give a whole talk about this topic as well. I think it's super exciting to see the different possibilities of how you can set up your teams, how this affects the software architecture on the one end, but also how do you kind of interact with the product team on the other side, and really make sure that teams can be, on the one hand, independent and fast, but still aligned and kind of moving in the same direction. And I figured out there's no right or wrong solution, but each solution has their ups and downsides, so it's a super exciting topic. Unfortunately, this is also the point where I pretty much stopped coding. So I sometimes still do a PR here and there, but I think developers don't really appreciate that anymore a lot when they have to review that. So yeah, it's working on the organization, designing team structures, designing processes, taking care about people development. People want to learn, want to grow, you want to be attractive as an employer. And it's a lot of communication. And as I said, communicating something like an architecture vision is something that is really not trivial. I started and tried to do that by painting a lot of pictures with arrows and boxes. You might know some of these. But I think it turns out that in the day-to-day work for a developer, these don't really stick. And the thing that we're trying out today is to speak about architecture much more in terms of stories. So we try to pick concrete examples of things that are good, that are bad, about things we're planning to do, and really make it very concrete and use very concrete language to describe where we actually want to go. I think that it's a very effective tool and helps people, also people who newly are on board in the company, to get a much better grasp than just flooding them with nice charts that, yeah, nobody remembers at the next day. So, some learnings. There are probably 100 more, so I had some trouble picking only 3. Learning number 1 for me is this is probably the stage where microservices do make sense. So finally, the investment in Kubernetes pays off here. And just help to be more independent, right? I mean, if suddenly several teams need to work on one monolithic application that really has severe downsides in terms of standing on each other's toes. So if you think you're ready to handle the operational complexity, here is the point to think about it. Failure number 2, it's again on the boring technology side. Building polyglot services, that was a term back in the days that was really cool, which pretty much means let each team choose whatever they want and think is best for the job, and they'll use it to build things. We did that, and it was a tremendous success in hiring people, because everyone felt, wow, this is really cool, I can do whatever I want. It caused huge headaches later on when these people who built the Closure service and the Scala service left the company, and we wanted to do some changes. Yeah, guess what? We had to rebuild a lot of stuff here, and we discovered our love for standardization. And we're now embracing that a lot. It's a tremendous thing if you can just kind of go to each service that every team has built and everything looks kind of alike. Fascinating, really cool. And in order to not be completely stalled with old technologies, we adopted this tech radar. Probably some of you know that as a technique where we deliberately look at new technologies, funnel them through some steps, evaluate them before we then really choose to either adopt them or not. And yeah, I talked about communicating architecture already. Using concrete language is something that really, really helps here. So what are survival takeaways? Build your team boundaries very, very carefully together with the product organization. Refactor your systems for scale. So this is the point where the load got much bigger for us, where we suddenly had to serve an international audience and kind of rewrote much of the code that we did before anyways. So this is also a point that gives you some leeway to do some tech changes under the hood if you want to. And yeah, still hiring and onboarding is a huge priority, especially the onboarding part. So if you're in the growth phase and ingest many new people, that of course also alters the culture, and the faster you can basically bring everyone up to speed to understand where you want to go, the better it really forms one team. And yeah, for your afternoon reading, Team Topologies, I think, is an excellent book that shows some of the options of how you can cut teams and some of the implications here. And yeah, monolith to microservices, that's something that was very interesting in that phase for us as well. Cool, so let me just really quickly touch on the M&A topic. Ejim did 4 major acquisitions throughout the days. We bought 2 German companies, a US company and a French company. So there's quite a cross-section of different scenarios that we were facing. What's the CTO role in all of that? So it has been changing a bit back and forth, but I would say the first point still is to bring the business folks down to earth. And I'm saying that with a smile, but I think there's some truth to it. From a very high flight level, all these acquisitions of other companies look like a brilliant idea. I mean, look at the features, they match up perfectly, and the new markets we can open. So this all sounds always super exciting, but if you look a little bit under the hood, reality most of the time is it's 2 companies with a huge history and a huge set of liabilities on the technical side. And if you combine something that hardly works with something that hardly works, this is just hard. Yeah, technical due diligence, therefore, is a super important thing. So at least you know what you're buying. For us, that didn't make a huge difference. We still did it, still working on some of the integration projects here. And then obviously managing the people side of it is kind of the most important thing when you bring together teams. Few quick learnings here. We attempted with one of the acquisitions to do something like a partial integration. So we said, yeah, let's combine tech, but let's keep the other people somewhat separated. That was really not a good idea. That didn't work out. It has many, many downsides. It just falls down at a lot of different places. So I would never do that again. I would say there's 2 ways of doing an integration. Either you completely assimilate the other company, or you keep them completely separate. And then number 2, these technical integration decisions are usually pretty expensive, first of all, and it's pretty easy to kick the can down the road because they are a huge investment up front, but measuring the impact is really hard. And I think the driver to really do these integrations quickly is oftentimes managing the complexity of it. And this is something inherently hard to measure, but I can just speak from my own experience here. We tried to delay some of these integrations because it was just not the right time. Let's finish these other features first, not integrated yet. And it always had a huge toll later on. So I would advocate for doing it quickly and focusing on it. But yeah, I can see that there are arguments for both sides here. And number 3, obviously, it's all about people. What a surprise. What I found quite interesting in this is looking at the we versus they boundary. That's also a term I just recently learned, but it's nice to observe when you speak with your team, when you speak with people from the new team that you acquired. You listen carefully when they speak about us and them, or they screwed up. And I think that the goal should really be to bring that boundary out as far as possible so everyone finally speaks as we. And this is actually pretty hard to accomplish. Cool. So now, last phase, keep innovating. This is pretty much where we are today. We're around 400 people today. We're 12 years into the business. And I mean, honestly, it feels sometimes like we just scratched the surface of the original ideas we had, which is, on the one side, pretty cool, if you can see how far we have come with only that. On the other hand, it's kind of frustrating, because there's always so much more, so many more ideas, so many great things we want to do. So yeah, this is still a challenge, I would say. And then it's probably also true that many startups fail. Everyone knows that. And I think they mostly fail because the product market fit just doesn't work out. So having one product that has product market fit is already difficult enough. But then coming up with the second one in the same company with the same people, I mean, if you do the math, it's pretty hard. So that's a real challenge. I think it's part of the CTO role to help mitigating that. I mean, on the one hand, we try to, of course, set up our normal product teams in a way that they can innovate. But what I observe is there's a lot of incremental innovation going on. The product gets better every day. This is great. But what we also did now and do more is set aside some time on the technical side to just experiment with technologies that we would usually not consider, that are maybe just not ready yet. But by playing around with them, we can give great input to these product discussions and kind of show ways on how we could do things differently. So I'm a big fan of this kind of, we have this 10% learning time that each developer can set aside and just work on pretty much random stuff, to be honest. We build a lot of POCs as part of these small projects to just demonstrate what could be possible today, what could be possible tomorrow, and what direction could we be heading from a technical perspective. Yeah, and this is pretty much where my presentation ends, because this is where I'm standing today. No survival tips yet. I can probably give them in a couple of years. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got for you. Thanks.